I'm 52 now, so I've been racing 35 years now. So you could do the maths.
And just give us some of the highlights of your career, just to establish, because you've had national championships. And all
okay. I wouldn't be super duper guy, but did all right. I won a few Premier Calendars. I won Archer. I won some stage races, Girvan. Won the national crit champs, national team time trial champion. Back in the 90s, the Premier Calendars, there were a lot of stage races. So I would have won quite a few stages in a lot of the stages in the Premier Calendars. Tour of Lancs, Girvan.
And you were in Europe as well.
Yeah, but in Europe, both as an amateur and as a professional, with varying degrees of success.
Yeah, so there's not a lot about bikes you don't know after a career that long.
I know a bit. I've forgotten a lot. I've probably forgotten more than most guys can remember. Not all, but most.
So how did you get into cycling?
Well, I suppose, Harry, when I started cycling, it'd be late 70s, early 80s, and I went down to the Southport Cycling Club and pitched up for a club run one Sunday. Back in those days, cycling clubs were one of two things. They were either a racing club or a touring club. So the Southport Cycling Club was a racing club. So my first experience of cycling would be going out with a bunch of racing cyclists. So there'd be 15, 20 guys out on a club run, all of whom had raced to a greater or lesser extent. My first ride would maybe have been a 80, 90, 100 mile ride over the Trough of Bowland, and at the time I probably wouldn't have realised it, but I was out with some real elite guys. There would have been the likes of John Parker, out with the Southport Cycling Club. He was a super guy. He rode for ACBB with Yatesy and Robert Miller. Back in the 80s, Bill Bradley would have been out with us. Bill Bradley was an amazing rider. Bill was double national champion, twice Tour of Britain winner. Yeah. So my first experience going out with the Southport would be getting a big old riding with them guys and getting advice from national and world class riders like that. It's invaluable.
Were you aware of just how good these guys were? Or?
No, at the time, no, totally not. No, I would have been aware that the guys had a huge amount of respect from the other club members, but at the start, no, I wouldn't have been aware of just how much credibility these guys would have had.
And how long before you went from being a newbie to actually taking it serious enough to go full time?
I suppose first started when I was last year as a schoolboy, so really after I left school I would be straight into racing full time, and back then, back in the 80s, there was a big economic downturn, and it sounds like it was boys from the black stuff, but it wasn't. There was no jobs. It wasn't that they were hard done to. There were just no jobs. So it was just a done deal that you would a good option was to become a full-time bike rider. Yeah. Like I say, we weren't riding around in threadbare pants or anything like that. We'd get 50 quid a fortnight. You'd be able to race, multiple times a week, and back in them days, realistically, bearing in mind now we're in 2018, aren't we? Bearing in mind we were talking about back in the 80s, a couple of 300 quid mid-season prize money wasn't high in the sky. Even as amateurs, that was a lot of money back in them days, and that was. You didn't need to be necessarily the world's greatest cyclist to be achieving that kind of, those incomings. Do you know?
Well, I remember reading the clubs, Liverpool clubs and Manchester clubs. They seemed to be the big rivals back in those days.
Yeah. So we'd have been, as I say, I was Southport. So Southport was a small club, with the exception of sort of John and Bill. Southport. It was all sort of all club guys really. But Liverpool, you'd have the Liverpool Mercury. On the Wirral, you'd have the North Wirral Velo. The Kirby CC over in Manchester, the Manchester Wheelers. There's multiple clubs I'm sure I've not mentioned there, but they were world class guys, coming out of these clubs. North Wirral Velo, Chris Boardman, Manchester Wheelers. Where do you begin with the Manchester Wheelers? Liverpool Mercury, Phil Thomas, Joey McLaughlin, Les and Steve Fleetwood, Pete Matthews. There was.
So, at what point during your career did you think about turning pro? And was it money, or was it just better racing, or was it?
Good question. I suppose I think in 1985 I did the Worlds in Italy, and I was he got selected for the Worlds. I was a disappointing result there. The following year, I went to France and raced in France for a proportion of the year. John Parker helped fix me up in a team over there. I won a couple of races. Well, I didn't really enjoy it in France. And I think in '86 I came back to UK and rode with the Paragon RT with Chris Walker, Keith Reynolds, Bobby Holden. There was some super duper guys.
It's the right dream team, isn't it?
Yeah. I was really lucky, and I can't believe how lucky I was to have had the possibility to ride with guys like that. It was a pro setup, Larry. We had team cars, we had top level equipment, top level clothing. We had a great calendar. We went to races all over the place. It was great, but I started wanting to make the next step up, because you could see we were racing some pro-am races, and some of the pro guys I knew were earning money and racing in Europe. So I suppose that's what my next kind of ambition. At the end of I think it was 1986, I had the possibility to go to the Commonwealth Bank Classic, and when I was over there, I got a phone call from Dave Lloyd, who had a connection with Birmingham Executive Airways, and they were proposing having a bigger team the following year. So myself, I ended up joining the team. So there's myself, Lloydie, Keith Reynolds, Kevin Byers. There's a huge guy called Michael Markinson, who was a Danish World Pro points champion in the team. And then later during the spring, Alan Gornall joined as well. So that was my first pro team, BEA, in '86. And
representing GB, that came about an interesting way.
Yeah, so I think '85 I first started doing some GB stuff. I suppose GB. I think '85 started off doing some races over in stage races in Germany, Belgium. Then we did the Worlds, and then the following year, GB guys used to get a lot of invitations all over the place. So typically we'd end up going to a stage race at the start of the year in France, 1 or 2 races over in France. Then we'd do some domestic stuff. Then we'd be scurrying around all over Europe doing particular stage races. And as I've explained to you, we would sometimes finish the season off in Australia, even New Zealand, which was really cool. You got a chance to see the world, but it was a long season, and we'd often finished up burnt out.
But you weren't being paid like the youngsters today.
No, we weren't getting paid. We were just you didn't expect to be paid. You did it for a jersey, and you did it for the love of it. The fact, if you wanted to be paid, you had to be a pro, and we didn't expect to be paid. It was our hobby, and we enjoyed it. Someone was paying for our travel and hotel upkeep. It was that was more than sufficient.
Now, once you had turned professional, how much of that racing was then in Europe?
So when we turned pro, my very first pro race with BEA I think my first race would have been E3 prize in Belgium.
Which is a huge race.
Yeah, monster race. I'm not going to lie to you. We were completely out of our depth. I don't think we finished many races that spring, but it was all good experience. The BA team, we mixed up a lot of the European racing with domestic stuff. So I think possibly my second. 1 minute we were riding E3 prize in Belgium. Next minute we were riding a crit round Eastway.
Yeah.
That's the different the mental levels. We were going from one to the next, you know.
And I guess you're going from riding maybe 200 riders at E3 to 50 riders around Eastway.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, 200 riders in E3, 50 riders. They were absolutely chalk and cheese. You know, one minute you were sat, 49 from the front. Next minute you were sat 199 from the front. It was a whole new experience.
And what other classics did you get a chance to experience?
So during my first stint as a pro, I got a chance to ride Amstel Gold Race twice. I rode Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Ghent-Wevelgem, and a lot of the Wednesday races, some of the smaller races like Flèche-Wallonne and stuff, which a lot of guys might not be over familiar with. But mark my words, they were tough. It was all good experience, and the BA team. Larry, we're trying to follow the ANC team, who had spent a couple of 3 years doing a similar calendar of events, and people forget that the likes of Joey McLaughlin had finished fourth in Amstel Gold Race. Malcolm Elliott was third in Amstel Gold Race. I think Paul Watson was fifth or sixth in Flèche-Wallonne. So when you think back, GB has always had some amazing talent, and some of the riders I've just mentioned there, they'd be up there in the Sky team, and successful ones at that, you know. And
I mean, nowadays people look at the likes of, I don't know, Ian Stannard, Luke Rowe, so many guys from the Sky team and other teams like Scott Thwaites and Dimension Data who are up there in his classics, but that's not a new thing. You guys were leading the way, and even going back to Brian Robinson winning a stage of the tour, it's always been, British riders have always been making their mark.
Yeah, they have, for sure, definitely, but to a lesser extent, the budget with the Sky team nowadays, they're the highest level team, aren't they? You forget these guys were doing it on the, on the back of a car and on a shoestring budget, so it was a bit more romantic, I think.
Were there team buses and stuff back then?
No. They might have had a minibus if you were lucky. Estate cars. No, there was definitely no team buses. No.
Yeah. And how often were you coming backwards and forth to these classics?
We'd have a couple of 3 weeks spell over there, and then we were back. I suppose it would depend on the UK calendar. We'd be in and out quite regularly. Big drives down into France or Belgium, or weren't uncommon. So it would depend on the domestic calendar at the time.
And I'm guessing the pro racing in England, certainly would have been in Europe, I would have thought, was quite team based.
Yeah, there were variants. I mean, ANC, late 80s, ANC would have been the biggest team. So I think our team, the BA team, was a small squad. There was 5 or 6 of us guys. ANC, Lycra, Alfords, Interent, those guys consolidated for particular races in Europe and did pole forces.
So lead out trains, they're not that new, even though.
No. I don't. Teamwork when we were guys. When we were young guys was slightly different. I don't think there'd be the same commitment to a lead out that there is nowadays. But we used to give each other lead outs for sure. Stuff I've noticed that's more acceptable or less acceptable nowadays, and was more acceptable if you had some guys in a group. It was common practice back in those days to make a nuisance of yourself in the chase behind and
disrupt
disrupt chases. That seems less acceptable nowadays. Perhaps it's not Perhaps it's not really safe. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess racing in Europe, I'm not sure whether or not they would have been the toughest days on the bike, or maybe some, because there were some silly races in this country. I don't know whether or not you did them, and that was in the same period, but London Holyhead and all that sort of stuff. What were the toughest days on the bike for you?
Toughest days for me personally weren't necessarily in terms of distance or terms of speed. I used to despise horrific. Well, I had some good results in poor weather, but I also had some horrific results in poor weather. So one day that springs to mind was 94, 95 at the Girvan. I think I spent a full day up the road with Gethin Butler and Stephen Farrell in the snow. It was a 100 and something mile stage. I still feel mentally scarred now, and I recall crossing the finishing line, walking into the hotel lobby, the hotel staff feeding me and putting me to bed fully dressed. That in particular is something
that was frozen to the core.
Frozen to the core, yeah.
Well, having seen the Girvan myself some days in Scotland in April, I can quite understand that. Who were your most memorable teammates over those years?
So some of the most memorable teammates, depending on in terms of quality guys, I suppose. One of my most memorable teammates I can think of, let me think, could be Chris Walker, Rob Ailes, Steve Cummings, Bradley Wiggins. They're all guys who I rode with. Chris Walker at Paragon, Ailesy at Rally Ambrosia, Steve and Bradley. I did a chic on. For example, Ambrosia, Ailesy was world-class rider, wasn't he? I mean, another really cool guy, Rod, was he was really positive, and even though he was the youngest guy in the team, he would be a really positive guy to be sat in the car with on the way to a race. Tim Hall's a good guy to have as a roommate, and always had a positive outlook. I went away a lot with Paul Curran as a GB rider. Paul was an incredible rider, wasn't he? But again, all these, they're all influential in different ways. Some of the guys, you know, at risk of sounding name dropping, obviously they've gone on to have successful careers. But the likes of Tim, if you're having a shit day and you had a big pressure on the following day, Tim was a great person to bounce ideas off. You know, in the early hours of the morning when you're worried about defending a jersey the following day, he was always, nothing fazed him. You know, and he was always at a positive outlook to the following day.
So your career has overlapped the careers of guys who've experienced the modern age, like Bradley winning the tour, Steve-O still winning tour stages or grand tour stages. I guess it's youngsters, they were probably learning their racecraft off the guys like yourself and all that.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, we did the Nationals one year, I think it was at Solihull, and I remember me and Steve was sat at the back of the race chatting away.
He still does that?
Yeah, well, I must admit, I wouldn't necessarily be the best example of I might even have taught Steve that. We share some bad habits in that respect, but I remember when we got to the finish, I'd managed to slide into the break, and I remember Steve saying to me, "Wow, how the hell did you get there? We were, one minute you sat at the back with me, and the next minute you were up the road." So I suppose experience, as you get older, experience counts for something, and when the race starts, the race starts, and you almost have a extra sensory perception of when the race is going to start. It's like when there's trouble in a bar, you know how to get, not to be there and to get out of the way when the trouble's about to begin, or to be in the right place when the trouble begins.
It must have been good to see these guys, the way Bradley won the tour and did what he did with the Olympics and all that, but also Steve-O, who's a bit of a cult figure, Steve. To be there and to see these guys, and be able to still watch these guys do what you were doing back in your day, riding the classics.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Can you imagine if they're lucky enough to get older and look back? Can you imagine some of the youngsters nowadays, what they'll be doing? I mean, GB cycling seems to be going from strength to strength. So I hope we can build on it. And yeah, it's great, isn't it? Like I say, you know, I was taking advice from the likes of Bill Bradley, and you know, perhaps I passed on some small words of wisdom to some guys who are going to be super riders in the future. I don't know. It's just yeah. Cycling's a funny job, isn't it, Larry? Your career spans a huge amount of time, and who knows whose careers you're going to overlap.
And at what age did you decide, I think it's time to get out? Because it does seem to vary from riders to riders, early 30s to some of them. I remember Malk still doing pro races in Britain at 50. So
Malcolm was an exception and not the rule, isn't he?
Yeah.
And not just doing races, winning them as well. I mean, can you believe that? It's just unbelievable, isn't it? And if people forget the level he was riding at. I remember a few years ago watching him doing some of those Tour Series races, and yeah, I mean, there was a race in, was it Durham? He beat, I can't remember who was it he beat in Durham.
I can't remember who he beat, but he was beating the best of the British had.
Yeah, I mean,
he won Cyclo Classic, you know.
That's phenomenal at his age, isn't he? For me, I enjoyed racing still when I was 30. I think problem I had when I was late 30s, I'd already started my business, and I suppose at that stage my results were getting less and less. I think it was the last year of Adidas, so I think it probably Steve would have been riding the Adidas Shecon team, and Paul Manning.
Was it the North Wirral team, was it?
It was what was the North Wirral team.
Yeah.
So I think that the last year of the Adidas team, that was pretty much my last year really serious. I'd started importing some stuff, and I came to the conclusion I couldn't do two things half-heartedly, and I really needed to put me fullest attentions on one or the other.
Yeah. And was that the beginning of this business here?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, it was. It was my first tentative steps into life in the real world.
So how did that actually come about? Making a career in the bike industry. Why are you still racing?
Well, I was lucky. I managed to combine racing and work. So I'd always done that. I had two careers. I had one at the start, stopped for a bit, started working, and then combined racing and work. So my second part of my career, I was always working, and it was just, to me, it was just a natural progression to go into take work more seriously, and that's what I did, you know.
And you started out as a rep?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. I suppose started off selling a few bits and pieces as an agent, and bit by bit started doing a few of my own bits, and here we are today.
And the way the world is who you know, and I guess you made a lot of contacts through the sport itself, but also working as a rep, built up a good customer base, which is probably still helping today. Yeah,
sure. It was really helpful for me to race and work. It was, for example, I used to go and see Tony Butterworth in Sheffield on a Monday morning, and Tony would get the Daily Telegraph open, and we'd have a cup of tea, and you'd be talking about what you'd done at the weekend and where you'd been racing. And it was a real icebreaker. You weren't just a day-to-day rep going into the shop. You were someone who there were racing shops, the guys who they could identify with you, and it gave you a degree of credibility. You weren't just Joe Soap going in there. I'd like to think that the racing really helped sell myself as a person. People buy from people, and when I was going round, if you'd had a particularly successful weekend on the bike, it often transpired you had a good week on the road as well. You'd be surprised.
So Dave, I guess one of the differences between nowadays and when you started was you went straight into racing with a club, whereas now people, there's private members, and they don't probably get the racecraft either out in training runs or in the amount of racing that they would do.
No, they don't, Larry. I say back in our day, we would have raced a lot more. In general, we would have raced a lot more. So the more you race, the more experience you get. And from my side, I think nowadays there's a huge emphasis on training. Make no mistake about it, fitness is imperative. There's nothing more important than fitness.
Right.
But I think there's seems to be less emphasis on racecraft and how to deal with particular situations during a race. That's something, as I say, I just don't feel there's enough emphasis on. Just really simple ABC stuff. I've been in races with guys who are supposedly pro or very experienced, and just basic stuff, not knowing really, not being sure which. Just without naming names, just guys not necessarily being very sure about what side of the wheel to change in the wind, and it just needs sometimes people just need to show someone out for little signs and stuff, and if you've never been told what signs to look for, you'll never know how to deal with it. So for me, for example, I remember the likes of Bill Bradley and people like that saying to me, if you're ever unsure which way the wind's blowing, because sometimes it isn't exactly on your left or exactly on your right, it can be just slightly off to a tangent. Look out for signs. Look out for leaves blowing in the road. Look out for the direction grass is pointing at the side of the road. Look out for the direction leaves are sat on a tree. There's all smoke, chimneys. There's thousands of things you can look for, and those silly little things, understanding which side of a wheel to change on, are really, really important. If you don't know how to make it easy for yourself, how do you know how to make it hard for someone at the end of a race?
So putting people into the gutter, that was probably one of the key things you learned pretty quickly. Yeah,
sure. I raced in Holland a lot, so when it was windy, in Holland, wind was the same as the climbs over here. You learn to deal with the wind very, very quickly, and I was big. I would say a big, strong guy. I'm not sure I was a big, strong guy, but I was a big guy, and I used to excel in windy conditions.
What were the ambitions that you had when you were riding with the likes of Bill Bradley and all that? Were you quickly?
Yeah, I suppose initially your goals are to be able to keep up with the guys in front of you on the club run, and then as you start to race, you want to be finishing the group in front of you. So really, it's just realistic step-by-step goals, really. Once you get comfortable at a particular level, it's human nature to want to progress and improve.
And with your experience of the game these days, that cycling that goes on, was it more relaxed? Were there more characters in the sport then?
Yeah, a lot more characters in the sport, Larry. When I was a kid, there was let's say there was some less serious characters.
So there were a lot of pranks and stuff.
Yeah, we used to get up to all sorts of mischief. I'd be guilty of larking around as much as anybody, we'd get up to all. Cycling's serious, isn't it? It's a serious sport. So, training and racing, sleeping, waking up the next morning, racing again. In a stage race, in particular, it's monotonous. So you break the monotony up by at the end of a day having a lark around. It's good for morale.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned to me was that you were always good for was getting away from the racing at the breakfast table, telling some stories. Yeah,
meal times are great, aren't they? Reminiscing about particular events during the course of a day. It's some of the serious stuff when you're suffering and when you're having it hard. It makes for good stories at the meal table, and when you've got another 4 or 5 hours ahead of you in the rain, it's good to be able to take a light-hearted view on the job, isn't it?
And what events, you mentioned the Clayton a little while ago, which is still running. The Sowens was still on the
yeah, that's ironic because both the Clayton and the Sowens are local races to us. But I know you'd mentioned, we spoke about the Lincoln. Apart from, I stand corrected, but I think apart from those races, I can't think of so many races on the calendar that are still with us now. It's there's a huge amount of races fallen by the wayside.
Well, the Archer that you won, gone. So I guess it is just a Lincoln, really, and the other locals.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I stand corrected. I'm sure there's some guys who have been putting races on for 100 years or more. But some of the stuff certainly that I can remember, it's a huge proportion of it's fallen by the wayside. All the Premier calendars that have gone. Brian Cookson used to organise a Tour of Lancs. That was a cracking race. Girvan, that's gone. Essex. There's so many.
Were they amateur races or pro races, or?
At first, Larry, they would have been what's called. They would have been Star Trophies.
Yeah.
That would have been in the 80s. But then, come the 90s, the Star Trophies turned into what were Premier calendars, and that was when pro racing and amateur racing sort of went into a melting pot and became one.
Yeah. Racing run differently because you still race these days. You race TLI and you race. PC races.
Yeah. Well, back when I was a pup, there was no Sunday trading and shops closed at 5:30. So the racing was more widespread. Do a lot more circuits and a whole lot more events. Sunday trading has slowly put paid to that. The sheer volume of traffic on the roads nowadays has affected the amount of circuits. I mean, in the northwest alone, we would have had countless circuits, and a lot of those no different to any other area of the country. They've faded. They've gone now. We're riding on far fewer circuits than we were back in my day when I was a kid, which is sad, really.
Were they bigger fields, bigger number of riders in races, or were they quite limited to like 40 or 60 riders or something?
No, I don't think. I think the fields were. The Sowins back in our day would have had a huge amount of riders in. So I don't think the fields have altered massively. The only thing that's changed really, I think everyone's a bit more uptight about public liability. So you've got to have marshals everywhere, which is correct. You know, there's a lot more traffic and people are more impatient. People in a rush to get places nowadays, Larry. So, say back in the olden days when I was a kid, Sunday was really quiet. You know, you could race anywhere on a Sunday morning, and the place would be like a church graveyard. You know, there was no one was stressed, no one was in a rush to get anywhere.
Yeah. And with as things like commissaires, there were still commissaires and people still watching your every move in races and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, sure. I mean, some of the commissaires. I mean, Tom Greep. Tom's still around. Jesus, I mean, when I first started, Tom was old then, and he's still going now. Even last year, old Tom, I think he had an accident in the car park at my colleague's race next door, Mike at Iron Bikes, and he broke a bone in his foot, but he's as hard as nails. Tom rolled round in the lead car, commissaire the race went ahead with a broken bone in his foot, and I mean, Tom had, have to forgive me, but Tom must be 70, 80 years of age. He's hard as nails, is Tom.
Bikes is what you do, and I guess bikes is something that you've seen probably more change, because in your day the bikes were probably quite different to the ones you sell now.
Sure.
The Kuotas.
Yeah, sure. So I guess when I was a kid, back in the 80s, bikes hadn't changed for 30, 40, 50 years. Bikes were made from steel. We had down tube shifters, we had clips and straps, 36 spoke wheels. The bikes were heavy by comparison to nowadays. We would have had 42, 52 chain rings, 13, 21 blocks. We didn't even have cassettes in those days.
Yeah.
So not 10 speed at the back, 5 at the back and 2 at the front.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Have you still got any of your old bikes?
No? I'm afraid to say they've all
So you've got
gone.
nothing to remind yourself how lucky you are now?
No, nothing at all. No, it doesn't. When I see some of the old stuff, I'm not particularly nostalgic about stuff like that.
And I think you actually ride a car now, don't you? I think that's when I got pictures of you racing.
Yeah.
I guess that's quite a different bike to race on than you would have been racing on in the beginning.
Yeah, sure. I mean, nowadays I ride around on a D.H.2 or a flagship mechanical group set Quota can't. I mean, it's absolutely chalk and cheese. There's comparisons. There is no comparison. The absolutely poles apart.
What sort of things are different when you're riding a bike? It's probably, I don't know, it's a few kilos lighter, probably 4 or 5 kilos lighter.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of difference between the weight of a bike nowadays and years gone by. Wow, the amount of gears you've got for a kick-off, the wheels make a massive difference. The frame for sure, everything. It's not a case of the more rigid, the more the lighter, the more what's a good word? A lot more sure-footed. Old steel frames back in the olden days used to be very. We used to get tank slappers. You'd be descending at high speed, and you'd get an horrific tank slapper. You know, nowadays that doesn't happen. It's modern bikes are poles apart. You know.
So how did Kuota, as we stand here, or as we sit here, how did that come about?
So I went to the Milan show in very late 90s, and Terry Dolan introduced me to the Kuota guys. So I reckon I was one of the first guys to start working with Kuota through Terry's introduction. That's when late 90s, very early noughties.
And the brand itself, how long has it actually been?
Yeah, more or less the same time. As I say, I'd be one of the first guys working with them. So in terms of distributors now, when we're all sat around at the distributors meeting, I'd like to think there's probably me and one other guy, the French guy in particular, who've been working with the Kuota brand the longest. We go back to the start, really, the pair of us.
So I guess you guys have formed this little team that's I don't know. It's helped you open doors to people like Cofidis and all that.
Yeah. So the French guy and me, we go back probably 20 years with Kuota now, and I'd like to think I'm pretty well thought of with the Kuota guys. In fact, Maurizio, the big boss from Kuota in Italy, at his suggestion, I got in touch with Cofidis management, and it was, I suppose, not down to me, but I hassled the living daylights out of them to come and attend our booth at Eurobike. So I'd like to think I played a small part in the Cofidis deal going ahead this year. I don't mind hassling people.
Yeah, and I guess Cofidis, a name like Cofidis, because it's got to be one of the longest running teams riding the bikes. That'll be a huge accolade for the manufacturer. Yeah,
we're really looking forward to working with the guys. We've Kuota started back a long time ago with the AG2R guys, and it's almost turned full circle. We're back with another French team. I think Kuota have been really lucky in the past with French teams, and new management at Cofidis. There's going to be some. I think they're going to rattle some cages this year. Hopefully, they get a ride in the Tour de France, and hopefully the Cofidis guys are back at riding the Kuota bikes at top level. So
what are the key products for the company that you run now?
Kuota and Gesture are really important to us. We're doing really well with the new power meters, and we're planning on getting involved in the e-bike market later this year. Fingers crossed. So
what have you seen coming that's quite fresh in the market?
I think e-bikes are going to have a big future, Larry. That seems pretty obvious to me. I can see road e-bikes taking off in a big way. I can see the baby boomers of the 60s spending the disposable income on e-bikes as they become less physically able.
I wanted to keep up with the youngsters.
Yeah. I could probably do with an e-bike myself.